Hey, New Mexico officers. Got a fairly recent case from the New Mexico Court of Appeals. I know what you're thinking. What have they done this time? But this case is actually pretty good. The case is State versus Donald Wing. It has to do with reasonable suspicion. I'm going to break it down for you coming up. Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Attorney Eric Scramlin here with Tactical Legal Solutions, and this is the Tactical In-Service Podcast, a podcast for law enforcement where I break down training topics in case law to help you, the law enforcement community, stay up on the law. Today, I think this is going to be a quick episode. I'm not sure I always say that. We'll see how long it goes, but it should be fairly quick. I'm going to be talking about a fairly recent case from the New Mexico Court of Appeals. It's State versus Donald Wing. Came out December 21st, 2021. The case has to do with reasonable suspicion in proximity to the scene of a crime. So it's geared towards my New Mexico officers, but if you're an officer in another state and you're following the channel, first of all, I appreciate it. And you might still take something out of this because I think a lot of states follow similar reasoning here. I've seen this in a lot of cases throughout the circuits and some other states. Really quick, before I dive into the episode, first of all, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, you got to subscribe. On this channel, I break down this case law for you. I try to put it in easy to digest terms. So make sure you hit the subscribe button. Let's dive in and see if I can hold true to my promise and keeping this thing short and sweet, because it's a really kind of brief point with this case. So even though the case is 28 pages long, what's good for you guys if you're an officer is that really the first 8 pages is everything you need to know. The rest of it has to do with sentencing arguments, more for the prosecutors and defense attorneys out there. I'm not going to go into that. I'm just going to go into the reasonable suspicion. All right, so what happened in this case? Let me go through the facts first here. Well, why don't I do this? Let me tell you the issue in the case, and then I'll break down the facts. So the issue that went to the Court of Appeals was whether or not the defendant, the issue was whether there was reasonable suspicion to support the seizure of the defendant, because there was an argument made at the lower court that the defendant, was he seized? Was it a consensual encounter? The Court of Appeals basically said, we're not going to address that. We're just going to look at whether or not reasonable suspicion supported the stop. And they said it did in this circumstance. So what are the facts in this case? So again, we've got another San Juan County case here. And the facts from the case that the officer testified to that were listed in the record here and mentioned in the opinion is that we had an officer on patrol at 1:15 a.m. in the morning, testified that it was a cold January day, and the officer sees 2 people in a truck illegally, what the officer appears to be illegally dumping stuff. And this is important because the officer did an excellent job in this case. I don't have the transcript, but listening and reading the opinion, I know the officer must have articulated the facts very well because the court cited a lot of this stuff. So the officer says he sees not the defendant, but he sees people in a parking lot, a truck. This parking lot is well known for unwanted subjects, well known for illegal dumping. The officer kind of turns around and starts heading over towards that area. He said it takes him about a minute or 2 to get there. By the time he gets there, the truck is gone, but he sees the defendant pushing a bike down the road, says he's pretty close to this lot, about 100 yards maybe from it, doesn't turn on his lights, doesn't order him to stop, but basically just starts having a conversation with him like, hey, what are you doing out there? The defendant immediately confesses, we're dumping garbage out there. And then the defendant ends up getting arrested, I think on a warrant, search incident to arrest, inventory, they find drugs on him, gets charged with that. So the defense attorney files a motion and says, hey, you didn't have reasonable suspicion to seize my defendant. Now at the lower court, they went into whether or not it was a consensual encounter. I'm not going to go into that here because the Court of Appeals doesn't address it. They simply looked at whether or not there was reasonable suspicion to stop him because the lower court said that it was a consensual encounter, and even if it wasn't, there was reasonable suspicion to support the stop. The Court of Appeals looks at the case and says, okay, we're not going to deal with consensual encounter, but when we look at these facts, we find under the totality of circumstances that reasonable suspicion existed to detain the defendant in this case. So it's a really good case. How did they get there, though? So the court focused on a couple of things. First of all, I have several videos where I discuss reasonable suspicion. I'll have one scroll up here on whatever side it's on, and take a look at that. Go back, because I kind of give you my breakdown of how you articulate reasonable suspicion. Maybe this officer in this case watched that video, because it looks like he did a really good job at the initial suppression hearing, because the court cites a lot of that. So what the court did is they cited some cases in New Mexico where officers had made stops because someone was in the close proximity to the scene. But what I gather from the court's reasoning here is that you can't just stop someone just because they're in close proximity to the scene. Because remember, reasonable suspicion is a totality of circumstances, big picture analysis. You have to articulate all of those facts, okay, that lead you to make rational inferences that criminal activity is afoot. So this is a big picture analysis here. It wasn't just the fact that the defendant was close to this lot, but when we take a look at everything, specifically, the court said the proximity to the scene of a recent crime may prove significant in determining the reasonableness of suspicion. As I mentioned, they cite some New Mexico cases that talk about that, but the big point here was the proximity to the scene plus the totality of circumstances. So the things that the court focused on was the fact that the officer articulated it was 1:15 a.m., really cold night out. People shouldn't be in that area. It was very unusual or rare to see someone in that area. And also, what do we know about that area? It's a high crime area. Oh, I hate it when you guys say that, though. Remember the case, I think it was Martinez from last year, where the officer said that it was a high drug trafficking area. Be specific about the crimes. The officer was in this case. The officer testified that this lot is well known for unwanted subjects and illegal dumping, the exact crime that the officer saw. That was another part of the analysis. The officer sees the truck, sees people what appears to be illegally dumping. So when you take all of this stuff and you put it all together, proximity to the scene, 1 o'clock in the morning, really cold night, people shouldn't be out there. It's well known for illegal dumping. The officer sees what appears to be illegal dumping, drives over there, sees the defendant pushing his bike. He's in close proximity to the scene. Altogether, totality of circumstances equals reasonable suspicion supported the stop. So that's what I stress, is how important it is to articulate the facts and look at the big picture, because that's what you need to do to establish reasonable suspicion, is a totality of circumstances. Avoid conclusions. You don't want to talk about things like acting suspicious or it was a high crime area. Be specific, articulate those specific facts. The officer did this in this case. In fact, I know I have some of you up in the Farmington PD. I don't know if this was Farmington or San Juan County, but if anybody knows the officer in this case, reach out to me. I'd love to actually bring you on the podcast and ask you specifically what you saw and what you testified to at the suppression hearing, because I think it would benefit a lot of the officers out there to know what you testified to, because you obviously painted a picture to the court here, and that's what I stress about articulating facts. So all in all, really good decision where the court recognized established law. They look at what we know about reasonable suspicion, and they say in this circumstance, when you put everything together, totality of circumstances, reasonable suspicion existed to stop this person. And then, as I mentioned, the rest of the opinion you don't really need to worry about, because they just go into a sentencing argument. That's for lawyers to worry about. So, okay, I think I kept my promise. I kept this thing under 10 minutes. I hope I gave you did this case justice. I really like this case. It's fairly simple, but it should just remind you the importance of articulating facts, totality of circumstances, and now you know we have a good New Mexico Court of Appeals case that can justify a reasonable suspicion Terry stop on someone that's in close proximity to the scene, if you can articulate, these additional things to build that totality of circumstance analysis there. So I hope that helps. If you guys have any questions about this case or any other cases, leave them in the comments. Reach out to me. You can find all my information at tacticalattorney.com. There's a link down in the description below. If you need training at your department, hey, don't forget about me. I'd love to come and do some search and seizure training with you, either at your department, virtually, and very shortly here, the online courses will be launched as well. So, all right, guys, thanks again. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Please stay safe out there. And remember, every battle is won before it's fought. See you on the next episode.